All right, welcome to a seminal moment in the history and the expansive law of YouTube. Why is it seminal? Because you, dear viewer, are tuning in to what I believe, in my very well-informed personal opinion, to be the moment where you are witnessing one of the greatest creators to ever grace YouTube land put out his first ever video. Don't quote me on that one. But anyway, we are here because I am releasing my first video. And who am I actually? I am the generalist, a person who, like many of you, I'm sure, is just interested in a variety of things. What different languages are spoken in any given country, economics, business, sports, entertainment. You just like learning things about learning things, regardless of whether you're gonna use this information or anywhere else. I'm one of those people, and I want to create content that speaks to people like me, and I'm sure you are too. And so that's what this channel is about, and I will be releasing videos weekly about things, various things, and those things will vary greatly, hence the name, The Generalist. And I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you have a great time and you have a great ride with me as we go on this journey of general knowledge. So, what are we going to talk about today? Today, we will be speaking about something that, we've seen. Unless if you are chronically online like I am, or I was, you will probably heard this topic before, and that would be Project Mbappe. So, what is Project Mbappe for those people who don't have a mild addiction to their mobile phones? So, what is Project Mbappe? It basically refers to the role Kylian Mbappe's parents, Faiza and Wilfried, have played in developing his career from the start in the suburbs on the outskirts of Paris to the point where he is now, one of the greatest players of our generation and one of the highest earners in world football as we speak right now. He currently earns a salary of about 31 million euros, which is a lot of money. And so, pursuant to this, a lot of people on social media saw it as a lucrative opportunity to build their own, great football player to bring out into the world for totally non-nefarious reasons. So you might be a parent that's really, really invested in ensuring your child's future financial success. And you don't have to do all the work because I did it for you. And I will, in this video, detail some of the salary figures and some of the pitfalls that might come with pursuing this path for your children, obviously. And if Project Mbappe or maybe Project Wemby or maybe Project Serena might be a better one for your needs. So without any further ado, let's get into it. We all know that football is the most watched sport in the world. And that obviously comes with its own, benefits, and including salaries. So we're not going to go into each and every single league and each and every single salary that those leagues earn, and we'll focus on the most lucrative of them all. That would be the Premier League. But before we get into the figures, I just want to put a disclaimer out. We're calculating the figures as recently as we're calculating the figures based on the most recent season. So that would be the 24-25 season or around mid-year 2025. So now that we had those caveats out, and another caveat, we won't get into endorsements and any other off-the-field income because then we're going to be here a while. So we won't get into, endorsements and any other off-the-field income, just to keep it simple. And so let's get into it. We're going to focus on the Premier League because that is, the most watched football league in the world, and it is the most lucrative for your child, obviously. So the highest paid Premier League player is Erling Haaland of Manchester City, is the Premier League's highest paid player, earning a salary of about £27.3 million. But if you're more realistic about your child's prospects, you'd be looking at an average salary of £3 million. Okay. What if you want to be even more realistic? And pay on the low end is usually reserved for younger players on their first contract, or players who've just made the crossover from championship clubs, which would be the second division, into the Premier League. And that usually amounts to about 150-ish, 120-ish thousand pounds a year. However, dear viewer, we all know that nobody plays sports until they're 60, right? And so, unfortunately, I must let you know that the average career length of a football player, according to FIFPro, is only about 8 years. And then once you factor in taxes, the average career length, which according to FIFPro is only about 8 years, and the fact that over 90% of every footballer who plays in the Premier League, the FA's Players Union shortens that time span for Premier League players to only 5 years. And even more, daunting for potential professional footballers is that 52%, that means the majority of professional football players, reports having financial difficulty within the first years post-retirement. So it would be important for you to plan accordingly, because there are taxes, there are expenses, there are all these other things that you would need to consider that will go out of your precocious young talent's salary that you would have to account for, to say less of the extremely low odds of your child becoming a professional football player in the first place. So you might be thinking, dear viewer, these aren't very good odds. Or you might have a little lamppost at home. Don't worry, I've got you covered as well, because instead of Project Mbappe, we're going to cross over to Project Wemby, or Project Wembanyama, for those of you might not be familiar with Victor Wembanyama. And that would be, or the NBA, for those of you who are not as familiar with NBA nicknames and nomenclature. So, contrary to what many people around the world might think, basketball is actually one of the most watched sports in the world. How much does the average NBA player earn? As of 25-26, the average salary stands at about $13.9 million. So I won't bore you with the details of our salary caps and mid-level exceptions and veterans exceptions, and we'll just get straight into the nitty-gritty, if you will. So as I stated at the beginning of the video, we'll be using this season's figures. And for the 25-26 season, the highest salary in the NBA is $59 million. And that would be, to no surprise of anybody, Steph Curry's salary for the season, with the average salary being about $13.9 million. So a lot more than what we were working with in the Premier League. So at the low end, the NBA has mandatory minimums, meaning that there's a set minimum that each player has to earn relative to their experience in the league. And that starts at $1.2 million for somebody with 0 years of experience, all the way to about $3.6 million for somebody with at least 10 years of experience. And again, we have to go into the caveat of career length, with the average NBA career only being about 4 years. And once you factor in taxes, and there are many documentaries that speak about how often NBA players have gone broke. And there was a really brilliant podcast episode where a former NBA player, Lou Williams, actually spoke about some of the costs that are involved, with being an NBA player. Like, for example, did you know that you actually pay taxes in every state that you play in? And for those of you who might not live in the US, you actually pay different taxes according to the state that you live in, because as we know, the US has different state taxes, meaning that you don't pay the same amount of state tax you would pay in California as, say, Michigan. So once you factor all of those things in, Lou Williams also mentioned the fact that you still have to pay agents, you still have to pay trainers, you still have to pay chefs, and that can easily eat into your salary, meaning that another thing to consider when picking a career. Maybe you might not have a little flagpole, or maybe you have a bulldozer. Then I've got just the sport for you, the NFL. I wouldn't be a responsible generalist if I didn't tell you about the perils of an NFL career. The first being that the average length is only about 3.5 years. To say less of the potential head injuries and other injuries that are caused by the rigors and general physical beating that you take on any given season. To say less of the average earnings, though they stand at about $3 million, the actual figures for most players, and you should also consider the fact that the typical NFL roster has about 53 players, meaning most players are actually well below the average. But it's not all doom and gloom here, because depending on how you play your cards, meaning the position your young whippersnapper will play, I would suggest one of the premium positions, which in the NFL, quarterback, defensive end, wide receiver, a cornerback, or an offensive lineman, specifically left tackle. And those positions, if your child happens to be one of the best at them, top 5 really, would be at least 30 million. With the highest being, of course, quarterback. As Americans often tell us, it's the most important position in sports. And the highest paid quarterback is the Dallas Cowboys' Dak Prescott, who earns about $60 million, with all the other positions ranging from about $30 million to about $47 million, which was the yearly earnings for Micah Parsons, the recently traded defensive end. The defensive end recently traded from the Cowboys to the Packers. So if you're willing to roll the dice and you want to try your luck at those positions, you should also know that unlike the NBA where salaries are fully guaranteed, the NFL doesn't actually guarantee your salary in its totality, with typically only the first few years of a contract. So, for example, if the contract was a 4-year length, typically only the first 2 or so years are guaranteed. But generalists, these are all male-dominated sports. There's no way female athletes would be earning the same amount, right? So what if you're looking for a more egalitarian option for your daughters? Then, dear viewer, you would be looking at tennis, where in recent years, both viewership for females tennis has risen markedly over the last decade or so, to the point where actually last year's women's final had a higher viewership than the men's final by a few thousand. And while traditionally male tennis players would earn more from the prize pots, the most recent Wimbledon tournament had an equal £3 million each for the men's and women's winners. And we would be remiss to not mention the great strides that are being made all over the women's sports world. You can only look at the increasing numbers in the WNBA, as well as the year-on-year records being set within the UEFA Women's Champions League, as well as the Women's Euros and FIFA World Cups. Who knows where we could be in 10 years' time? I know there are many of you saying, but what about cricket? What about rugby? What about field hockey? Which, if you did, one of the most popular sports in the world. And you want to secure your child's financial future, don't you? So you want to go with those sports. For that reason, that cricket, while the IPL is great and all, rugby, while that's great too, and while field hockey is really nice as well, those are not the battlegrounds to secure the type of lifestyle where, your child, obviously, are looking for. And so we're not even going to look at them. So, with that out of the way, let's sum it up. Football is great for the career length. So while the NFL can be great, it only really works if you're really disciplined financially or you sit at the top table of your respective positions in the league. Basketball works because it guarantees the highest average salary, but it's only limited to a very, very small population, and the career length is somewhere in the middle of the sports that we delved into. Football is probably the middle ground, if you will, of these sports because the careers are the longest, relatively speaking. The salaries, depending on the league that you play in, are decent. And according to the F8 Players Union, most players, the vast majority, actually still get meaningful employment afterwards, even though 90% of them are going to have to work afterward. So the responsible generalist would advise you to soldier on with Project Mbappe. But the generalist gambler would tell you, put on those pads and let's go earn $60 million a year. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I release random videos about random things ranging from sports, like we did today, business, politics, economics, any new, random, weird, wacky, and wonderful thing I think you should hear about today. Thank you, and cheers.